Have you seen the statistics on what it's costing President Obama with the motorcade and everything else to move around Paris during the course of the climate discussions that are going on? It is an astronomical sum of money, and also his carbon footprint is really really large. And there's a photograph of all of these world leaders, at least a group of them, eating in what looks to be the could be the dining room at Versailles. It is so well appointed. This is a great way for your elite elected officials to travel the world on your expense while they tell you you've got to cut back. They're all eating in the finest restaurants or the finest dining rooms, and they're flying around in large jets and they're driving around in large limousines surrounded by security. And this is because they're trying to dial it back for the rest of us. Came across a few things today that I wanted to share with you about all of this. Number one, we had a discussion, I think yesterday, about coal on the program and about how the Obama administration has really devastated that industry as Obama keeps promising, the president keeps promising that we are going to have wind and solar pick up the slack. And of course, the comment, always the joke about that is that the countries that use that call themselves third world. He's, of course, apologizing for the U.S. economy and its great strength since the founding of the country and industrialization. But think about what that economy delivered for the people who lived on this continent versus what people in other parts of the world have had to deal with, and many of those people still living in primitive Stone Age conditions. Wall Street Journal had this today on the op-ed pages. Obama's Appalachian tragedy. Since 2009, so we're talking 6 years, 332 mines have closed in West Virginia alone. And there are mines, of course, in Kentucky, and fewer of them, but some in Tennessee, and there are mines in places like, well, probably you'd find them as well in Wyoming, and a lot of them were in Montana. But 332 mines alone in the state of West Virginia. You pull out your map, you look at your map at how big West Virginia is. It is not that big of a state. This is devastating to the industry there. And if it's devastating to the industry, then it's devastating to a lot of other things that are impacted by it. The writer says in the last 3 years, 27 coal mining companies with core operations in central Appalachia, a region roughly centered in southern West Virginia, have filed for bankruptcy protection. The list includes a number of large-cap publicly traded entities such as Alpha Natural Resources, James River Coal, and Patriot Coal. Production of coal in southern West Virginia declined by 45% between the first half of 2011 and the first half of 2015. All of this means more expensive electricity, which they'd like to discourage you from using in the first place. They'd expect you to just sweat it out on a hot day or throw on an extra sweater on a really, really cold day. How many jobs has this cost West Virginia? 9,733. So nearly 10,000 people have lost work. West Virginia has the highest unemployment rate in the country. West Virginia also has the lowest labor participation rate in the country. Now, you realize if you could sell all of this coal, and there is a market for it, there are markets all over the world for coal, you would not have a loss of these jobs. You would not have 10,000 people losing their jobs. They would still have their jobs. And if we would really get serious about using coal, we would probably have another 10, 20,000 jobs added just in West Virginia alone. And then you think about what we're doing with fracking. And as I said yesterday, fracking has been the one thing that has kept us out of a Great Depression because the economy has never really revived since the collapse 7 years ago. Well, think about that for a moment. Why has that happened? Cheap energy. Cheap energy coming out of the Bakken Shale in the Dakotas, also coming out of Texas. We have oil available in Colorado. The numbers are just astronomical about what we could extract from the hills of Colorado. But if you were to throw in the coal in West Virginia and the coal in Montana, you might turn the economy around. Who knows? It might start looking like the 1950s and through the mid-1960s in this country all over again. We have 4. We've doubled the temperature in the last few minutes. We're at 4, 11 minutes after 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We have a caller joining us. You're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. How you doing?
Wonderful. What's up?
You know, my dad used to work for Amalgamated Sugar back in the 70s, and I remember going over to that plant up in Paul with him and seeing just how dirty that coal was. And you go over to those plants now with the scrubbers they have and the technology they have on those exhaust stacks and stuff, There's hardly any smoke that even comes out of those stacks. There's huge amounts of steam, but the smoke is very minimal, and the particulates in the smoke are nothing. You go over to those plants now, and there's not that black crud all over the place. You don't get the soot with it.
And some of the scrubbers, and I've seen some of these installed. You take a stack, but what they do is there's a liner in the stack. It's round like the stack, and it adheres to the sides, but that absorbs all of this. So as it goes up the stack, this is all being picked up, and you can change those filters out whenever you need to.
Exactly, and they have come so far with the technology on that, but they still just demonize this form of energy to no end. They're trying to put it out of business.
Because there are people out there who stand to make a great deal of money if we go to wind and solar, and those people are well connected with the Democrat Party.
Exactly.
Hey, thank you much for the telephone call, sir. Good hearing from you. Telephone number to reach the show, 736-0300, 736-0300. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Speaking of that, Washington Free Beacon had this today. Green energy investors look to cash in on Paris talks. A group of millionaires and billionaires that includes major investors in green energy are using the international climate talks kicking off this week to push for more government subsidies for the types of companies in which they are investing. Now, these are people who often have given, Tom Steyer, for instance, given huge wads of cash to candidates running as Democrats or to political action committees supporting these Democrats. And what they expect in turn is when their guy gets elected and gets control of the federal treasury, that their guy will then turn around and take your money out of the federal treasury and give it to these rich guys. That's what this scam is really all about. You're up next, and you're on the air with Bill Colley.
Hello. Were you saying earlier that the Democratic Party was deliberately trying to get felons back into voting again?
Ted Cruz said that.
Okay, well, it sounds like a television episode. Doesn't that seem weird to you?
Well, actually, there have been some Democrats in some parts of the country who have proposed that we should restore voting rights to convicted felons. So Cruz is actually quite accurate.
Yeah, but a Democrat is a Republican is a Democrat. It doesn't matter who you vote in. It sounds like they're just trying to trick people back into voting.
Wow, gosh, that's a profound statement to be made today. 9:15, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Columnist and author George Will speaking about this situation on a program on Fox Television last night, along with Charles Krauthammer and I believe the other fellow is it Brett? Anyway, we have George Will speaking about global warming, and he said, "We've heard so much about it, it's become like the boy who cried wolf." Take a listen to his thoughts on this.
The people of ISIS, wherever they are in northern Iraq, are saying, "Oh, we've been rebuked." This is part of the problem, that everything is said to confirm global warming. And global warming is now said to cause everything else. So it's a theory that can't be refuted, which means it's no longer a scientific theory. The amazing thing is, never in history, anywhere ever, has all the power of the modern state, supplemented by mass education, supplemented by the mass media, supplemented by journalism and entertainment, been all employed for 30 years to propagandize about this sort of thing, about global warming and all the rest, to almost no effect. Fewer Americans carpool today to work than carpooled in 1980. SUVs have never been a larger proportion of the vehicles being sold in this country. The American people may profess occasionally to be concerned about global warming, but their behavior tells you that none of this propaganda has had any effect.
And Juan, when Britt had his...
There you go. There's the clip there at the end. I don't know who that was, but got to thank the friends at Fox for not editing that quite as well as they should have. But gives you an idea. One of the talking heads there last night actually bringing up some facts. The American people have not bought into, they'll tell you if you poll them. They'll tell you if you poll them that they are concerned about climate change or global warming. But when you come right down to it, we go about our business like we always have. And it's really not the most important issue. Certainly if you were to take a look at what issues are most important to Americans today, The top two would be jobs and likely terrorism, and maybe not even in that order. This comes from a very liberal publication called Politico. Why the Paris climate deal is meaningless. A writer by the name of Oren Cass says, the more seriously you take the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the angrier you should be about the plan for Paris. So this is coming from the other side. The writer says the promised emission reductions will barely affect anticipated warming. A variety of inaccurate apples to oranges comparisons have been strained to show significant progress, but MIT, that's Massachusetts Institute of Technology, its joint program on the science and policy of global change, calculates the improvement by century's end to be only 0.2 degrees Celsius. Comparing projected emissions to the baseline established by the UN, that's the United Nations, back in 2000 shows no improvement at all. So even lefties not happy with what's going on in Paris. It's all for show. It is all for show. This allows the leaders, most of them very liberal, who are attending, to go back to their own constituents, and it allows them to say, hey, we're doing our best, or we're trying, and then give us some more campaign cash. It also allows them to turn around and reward those rich donors who would like to get subsidies for building solar panels and the giant whirligigs, the giant pinwheels you see spinning out there as you drive through the desert. 9:18, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And please, the Chinese and the Russians, they're not serious about this. They show up. Mr. Obama gets to come home and say, oh, they're in full agreement with me. Something needs to be done, and therefore it shall be done. And this is wonderful that the whole world works together, and I hope it frightens the pants off ISIS. But he knows the Chinese are not going to honor this. He knows the Russians are not going to honor this. The Russians need to pump oil out of the ground. They're not building giant whirligigs. They're pumping oil and selling it, and they're burning oil, and they're burning coal. And a caller pointed out yesterday, the Chinese burned so much coal in 1 year, they've likely in 1 year burnt more coal than likely the United States did in all of the 20th century. So why are we spending all of this money on what is nothing more than a dog and pony show? So a few people, a few liberals somewhere, can feel better about themselves while they're tooling around in their Prius. And frankly, I haven't seen as many of those on the road lately as I saw 4, 5, 6 years ago. Why? Because the U.S. economy, helped along by fracking, has managed to bring down the cost of fuel and energy in this country, traditional forms of energy, to the point where it doesn't make any sense to drive one of those vehicles. It's called the free market. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. It's not quite free, though, because it's so heavily regulated. If we'd back off on that, you'd probably be paying 75 cents a gallon right now for gasoline. Oh, and just a quick note as an addendum. In a related story, the EPA has bypassed Congress and says it is now going to raise the requirement for even more ethanol in your gasoline to rot your automobile away.